Jeff Pegues joins us now from Washington. Jeff, we know the president is meeting with his top security officials this morning at the White House. What is likely being discussed at the meeting?
Well, what is likely being discussed is who may have been behind this attack on Paris. This is an attack that a lot of people in the intelligence community are looking at as, in some ways, a turning point. This is ISIS, and the French president has blamed ISIS for this attack. But this is an ISIS that has evolved, if indeed ISIS is behind this kind of attack. This is, in a lot of ways, an attack that is out of the playbook of what al-Qaeda used to do. You have multiple people coordinating attacks, and that's what we're seeing here. It is not the type of lone wolf attack that U.S. law enforcement has talked about, but it is the kind of attack that officials here in this country have been concerned about.
And what do we know? I guess obviously this might change the picture, but what do we know about ISIS capabilities, looking at how advanced and sophisticated this attack was?
Well, this shows a different type of ISIS capability. Whoever carried out these attacks, and obviously they're looking into DNA and fingerprints, trying to find out who exactly the attackers were, what type of contacts that they have had over the last several days and months. But if indeed this is an ISIS attack, it shows a different kind of capability that, yes, law enforcement has been concerned about. But to be able to coordinate attacks like this shows how the terrorist group has evolved, if indeed they are responsible for this one.
Well, then, Jeff, given that evolution, how does that change U.S. strategy to protect the homeland?
Well, just as there were changes and lessons learned from the Charlie Hebdo attack earlier this year, there will obviously have to be some changes in how U.S. intelligence, U.S. law enforcement investigators, and the French and European authorities respond to this type of attack. Right now, it is relatively early in this investigation as they try to figure out how all of this evolved. But the thinking is, once you get more specifics about who may have been behind this and how it was planned, then you can move forward with how do you respond to this. But what concerns a lot of people here is when you look at what happened in Paris yesterday, and then you look at what happened earlier this year with the Charlie Hebdo attacks, the thinking in U.S. law enforcement circles was, Paris and the French have learned lessons, and that is a city that had good counterterrorism coverage. But if something like that can happen there after the lessons learned from Charlie Hebdo, and then these attackers can get that close to the French president who was in that stadium, that sends an alarming message.
Jeff, taking a step back for a moment, I know that we have been hearing on a pretty frequent basis security officials in this country, the Justice Department, going after ISIS sympathizers who, some of them are American, who were born here, others who naturalized citizens. What I'm wondering, though, Jeff, is do we have a sense of how many Americans have actually gone abroad to fight with ISIS?
Well, the numbers that we've heard, about 200 people are in that foreign fighter category, 200 Americans, but the number of Europeans going, it's a lot higher. And it is widely acknowledged in the law enforcement community here in the U.S. that the Europeans have a much bigger problem with that, foreign fighters going over and then coming back home. And that's why law enforcement in this country and in Europe, they've been trying to track these people, but it is hard to do. And in this country alone, the FBI director has said, in fact, late October, he said that there are 900 investigations that they have across the country in 50 states looking at people who may be ISIS sympathizers. So law enforcement in this country and really in Europe and across the globe has its hands full trying to keep track of people who may be ISIS sympathizers.
Jeff, I wonder about the coordination between the French and other Western security authorities. Do you have a sense of what's happening behind the scenes and how closely those countries are cooperating?
Well, the U.S. and France, they always work closely in situations like this. We saw that with the Hebdo attacks, and we will see that now. In fact, many of our sources telling us yesterday and this morning as well that they are reaching out to the French, offering any type of support they might need at this time. So there is always good coordination here between these allies, the British, the French, and the U.S., because there is a lot at stake for both nations and for all three nations and for the law enforcement community for all three nations. So it's important that they coordinate, and that's what we're seeing now, and that's usually the case in situations like this.
Jeff, you talked about ISIS sympathizers a moment ago. How concerned are U.S. officials, given obviously the carnage that happened overseas and the tremendous attention, of course, rightfully so, that those attacks are getting, as well as the ISIS claims of responsibility? How concerned are U.S. officials about ISIS-inspired attacks here now perhaps being a greater threat?
Well, whenever something like this happens, it sort of raises the concern level, if you will. And I think that's what we're seeing now. And that's why it's so important to learn the lessons once you start investigating what happened. And the same can be said for the Russian plane crash that was leading the headlines last week at this time. So there is an effort to learn lessons from this, because then law enforcement in this country, in the big cities across this country, they have to react. And so we will see here a thorough examination of what happened in Paris so that it's not repeated here.
All right, Jeff Pegues in Washington for us. Jeff, thank you.